right, welcome everybody. Welcome to our March garden talk. Today we have Brandie Waite with us doing raised bed basics. I know this is a topic that a lot of people are interested in, so I will turn it over to Brandie.
Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Brandie Waite. I took the Master Gardener training in 2012. I did not know really anything about gardening, so I learned a lot through that training, and I've been gardening ever since. I was really attracted to building raised beds because it didn't require a rototiller. I didn't have any equipment at the time, and it just seemed like a easy gateway into gardening. So these are my first three raised beds and where I started. Okay, so I wanted to start with some recommended reading. One of the first books I highly recommend is The Square Foot Gardening by Mel Bartholomew. He's the founder of the Square Foot Gardening Method. So he breaks it down on the benefits, the planting, the soil mix. All of the libraries have various versions of this book, so I would highly recommend checking that out. And then I found this book a few years ago. It's Raised Bed Revolution by Tara Nolan. She's a Canadian grower who fell in love with raised bed gardening, and her book is filled with different garden plans. So she has all sorts of inspiration and different building plans in this book. So I found it really inspirational. She has a box you can build like a potato box, and you add the layers as the potatoes are growing up of wood to make that potato bin. And this book is available at the Batavia Richmond Memorial Library. So if you're a library member, you can check it out there and take a look. I figured I would also put my resources up here first. Basically, if you Google raised bed gardening and the word extension, you should get a lot of these resources automatically because it's going to find that it's through cooperative extension or through the state university, the land grant university that houses these resources. Um, but we can give you these at the end as well. Okay, so what are raised beds? They are not anything new. Humans have been growing in raised beds for hundreds of years. They started out with mounded or freestanding raised beds. So that is where you actually build the soil up 6 to 12 inches thick. A lot of times you would add organic material on top, and the beds are typically 3 to 4 feet wide. But because there is no solid structure around them, the beds are going to settle and compress over time. So you have to reshape them pretty much on a yearly basis. The structured beds are typically the raised beds that we think of that are built with a structure, either out of wood, metal, or other materials. So there's many reasons of why you would want to choose a raised bed. Sometimes the soil conditions in your area are just not right for growing in the ground. The soil may have been contaminated. You might have really compacted soil with poor drainage. Having a raised bed allows for better drainage. It also heats up the soil faster in the spring. It's easier to work in the soil. You don't necessarily need to rototill, so you can get out there and start gardening sooner. Those with limited growing space find it easier to have a raised bed that you can easily access. You can add vertical structures so you can grow in your raised bed as well as up on a trellis. You can modify the height of the raised bed so that you're not so much on the ground and doing a lot of kneeling and working on the ground. You can elevate it to suit your needs. So there are a lot of advantages to growing in raised beds, but some of the disadvantages are the upfront cost, the labor sometimes to build a custom bed. The soil can tend to dry out a little faster than if you're growing in the ground, and they aren't permanent necessarily, but once you have them in, removing them can be a chore. So location, choosing a location, this is the same as if you were planning out a traditional garden. If you're growing vegetables, you want a location that's going to have 6 to 8 hours of full sun. You want to consider where's your water source, how far do you have to go to bring water to the beds? Um, don't make the beds wider than 3 to 4 feet because you want to be able to reach into the middle without stepping into the bed on either side. You want to think about what kind of garden tools you have for pathways. Make sure the pathways are wide enough for a wheelbarrow or a garden cart. I made that mistake with expanding my garden. Some of my pathways are a little too narrow. And if perennial weed pressure is a problem, you might want to consider putting down landscape fabric. If not, you can just put cardboard over the grass where you're going to put the beds. Also consider leveling the beds. This is a really good example of how they leveled the beds on a slope. I also did not do this, and it is a real pain when the soil is dry and you're trying to water and all of the water is just running to the one end of the bed. So, lesson learned there. And for materials, the possibilities are pretty much endless. I mean, it's what you like, what you want to use, what you can afford to use. It's a personal choice here. So that's up to you on what materials you want to use for your raised beds. One of the most popular materials is, of course, wood. Uh, your best choice would be a natural rot resistant wood such as cedar, hemlock, locust, black walnut. However, those rot resistant woods are typically the most expensive of your wood selection. So there's also untreated lumber. So you could use just regular untreated lumber. And then there is pressure treated lumber. There is a debate with pressure treated lumber, but they stopped using the arsenic solution to treat lumber, I think in 2014. So now it's treated with a copper based solution. And there are studies online that they have done regarding using pressure treated lumber and the chemicals or the copper that leaches into the soil and how much is being taken up by the plant. This is a personal choice. You got to go with your gut and what you feel good about. If you don't want to use pressure treated lumber, you can go with untreated or rot resistant wood. That's up to you. However, do not use railroad ties. They are treated in creosote, and that is really nasty stuff. The plants probably will not live. They will probably kill the plants. So I just want to give some inspirational slides here on the wood. You can use old logs that have fallen or being cut down off your property to build the bed. They will decay over time, but they're a good source to hold the soil in place while they're still there. Stacking timbers can be a good option. You just want to make sure that you support these corners so that there is no shifting. I personally would probably drill each end and then put a piece of rebar through so that there's no shifting of the bed. It doesn't fall apart on you if you lean on it wrong. And you can get creative with different shapes. I love this spiral uh, form here. That's really fun. You can do like a hexagon shape. So you can be really creative with different wood. Just be mindful if you're using reclaimed wood. Again, it could be old pressure treated wood with the arsenic chemical. You can double layer the boards to make them taller to suit your needs. If you're going to go longer than 8 feet in length, you really want to add some center supports at the like 4, 6 foot marks so it helps support the center so the bed doesn't blow open on you. When you're making a taller bed like this, you can also think about how much soil you need to fill it, and you can either create a false bottom with like plywood, or some people will take old 5 gallon buckets or plastic totes or logs or some other material, and they'll put them strategically in the bed to take up some of that volume and then fill the rest with soil so you're not using as much soil. This is the hugelkultur raised bed. So hugelkultur is a method where they would stack logs, branches, plant debris. They would put it into a mound and then they would grow into it because when the logs and the branches start breaking down and decomposing, it releases nutrients into the soil and it also the decaying logs act kind of like a sponge, so they'll hold the moisture as they're decaying, and then as we get into a drier period, they'll release the moisture back into the soil. So this is a great way to fill a deeper bed as well. Stone is a very popular material. You can use landscape pavers, bricks, cinder blocks. With cinder blocks, you just have to be careful. There can be a material called fly ash that's in the manufacturing process. So you might want to look and see if you can find the ingredients of what they were made out of to see if it's in there, if you're concerned, if you're growing food crops. And then you also want to remember that concrete will leach lime back into the soil over time. So it might affect it's going to raise up your pH so that you might want to check on that every couple of years to make sure your pH is still in the right range for growing your crops. This is a really good example of landscape pavers that one of our master gardener used to build a raised bed on her property. So that's just a really nice aesthetic look for her raised bed. So metal is also a very popular material. They have many corrugated metal raised bed kits available now. So they come in rectangles, ovals, circles. You could use an old livestock stock tank if you want. I have a bunch of galvanized tubs, vintage galvanized tubs that I grow peppers and tomatoes in. They're long lasting, but they can be expensive up front. And sometimes they heat up really fast, depending on where they're located, how hot the summer is. So you want to make sure you put your heat loving crops in those for the middle of summer. And same thing, you can create a false bottom. If you have a really deep trough like that, you might want to create a false bottom so you're not having to fill the entire trough with soil. Here's an example of a gentleman from Leroy sent us his raised bed garden made out of all the old troughs, and he's got a nice irrigation system set up. These are a couple of my galvanized tubs, the old laundry tubs that I have. I love these. They're on my back patio, and I grow lettuce, just lettuce in them. I try to succession sow it so they're different at ready time, at different at ready at different times, but it's really easy to just go out there, snip some lettuce for hamburgers or make a quick little salad. So other containers that are available, there are grow bags now. A lot of the big box stores sell them and garden centers sell them. You can get them online. They come in different sizes and configurations. They air prune the roots. So the plant isn't supposed to get pot bound. I still think it does a little bit, but the only problem I have found with the grow bags is that they dry out really, really quick. So you have to water them a lot, and then because you're watering so much, you need to fertilize more. So be mindful of that. But it is nice. You can kind of move them around if you need to, move your like moving pots around. When I first started gardening, I had a whole patio garden of 5-gallon buckets on our apartment patio. And so I still use some of these buckets today. They're really great for growing peppers. I do not change the soil in them regularly. What I do is when I'm transplanting the peppers, I make sure I put a really good amount of compost in the hole and then I plant the peppers and then I try to fertilize too. But again, they can dry out kind of fast, so you want to make sure you keep them watered. Depends on how many holes you put on in the bottom or like on the sides. If you add too much drainage, they dry out a lot faster. But you want to have enough drainage because you don't want them to be too wet. So it's happy medium there. You can be creative. What do you have laying around that you can make into a raised bed? A lot of times, all you have to do is add drainage to something, and you can create an elevated salad table. This one is like a galvanized window box on some sawhorses. This one is like a laundromat cart. I have no idea where they got it from, but it's pretty cool. So what do you got laying around in the basement and the garage? These are really nice. They combined the timber and the corrugated metal to create these custom raised beds out in Arizona. You'll see this a lot online when you search raised beds, the arch. So a lot of people will buy a cattle panel, or it's called hog panel, from Tractor Supply or Runnings, and then they bend it over the raised beds to make a trellis, and it adds a nice visual interest, but it's really nice for vining crops. I've actually been really successful with growing acorn squash on a trellis like that, and it does really well. And you just harvest, all your squash at once, and I bake it all and then freeze it for the winter. Raised beds can also be adaptive. So they can be elevated, so you don't have to do as much kneeling or getting down on ground level. This is a really nice plan that I just found from Oklahoma State Extension. They have the actual detailed instructions available of how to build this. They took a food safe 55-gallon barrel and they cut it in half and elevate it into this frame, which is I think this is an ingenious idea. So if anyone's handy, I have the link to the PDF if you want to get the plans for this. And they also make wheelchair accessible raised beds. So this one to me seems like it's a little too tall, but it does allow the wheelchair to go underneath. But even if you had a stool and you just wanted to sit in garden, you with this like kind of not really L shaped, but U shaped, I guess. You can access both sides, the back, the other side, just from one position, which is really nice. Here's a really fancy one. This is available to purchase online. It's quite pricey, but it shows a good layout of the how you would want to construct it if you wanted to access, be more accessible. And then this one is also a kit where they have the frame so that you can, if you were in a wheelchair, you could pull right in and garden. And I feel like that one's at a better height, mobility wise. You can reach in and really get in there. So simple raised bed construction tips. You want to have the bed be at least 6 to 12 inches deep. So they recommend 10 inches is the minimum if you don't have access to the ground underneath, especially if you're growing like vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, deep-rooted things. If you only have 6 inches and there's no ground underneath, the plants might struggle a little bit there. So if you know the soil underneath isn't any good, or if you're putting it on a hard surface, you want to go for a deeper bed. You also want to alternate the corner joints. I'll show a better slide of this to make a perfect square or rectangle. I didn't do this with a bunch of mine, so then I tried to do the raised bed method, and I don't have a perfectly square bed, so I can't divide it nicely, which drives me crazy. And if you turn the heartwood in towards, towards the bed, when the wood dries, it'll tend to curl. I have some of mine too, where the heartwood is going out, so the boards they're curving out away from the bed instead of in. So just little things to look for when you're constructing the bed. Again, if it's longer than 6 feet, 6 feet, you could probably get away with a center without center support. But if it's 8 feet, I definitely would add that center support in. It could just be a piece of rebar up against the board into the ground so that that middle doesn't blow out. They make these really nice prefab corners. I believe they're probably stainless or some sort of powder coated material that's not going to rust. And you can just place your lumber right in there so it's perfectly aligned, or you can do it the old-fashioned way and pre-drill the boards and line them up. So typically, most raised beds are 4 by 4 or 4 by 8, and you can go to the Home Depot or Lowe's, a lumber yard, and you can have them cut a 2 by 10 into two pieces. So if you don't have a saw at home to do that, most places will cut them for you. And you need 20 coarse threaded screws, do stainless or galvanized so that they don't rust. This is available as a PDF if anyone wants the specific instructions. This is from Florida State University, but the PDF's no longer available online, but we can email it to you if you would like it. So you basically stack your boards, you pre-drill 4 to 5 holes on each end, and then you line up your boards. It's kind of hard to tell here, but I have another slide that'll show. So one board is going to go over this end, and then the other end will be like opposite, so it makes a perfect square. So here it is. So you can see that this one goes over this board, and then this board goes over this board, and you alternate. If you just do these boards inside each corner here, you will not have a perfect square. My dad, who was a carpenter, would be really mad that I did not build my beds perfectly square. But then you can add the little lines here for every 12 inches and make your square foot grid. Okay, so filling the bed, that's a whole other story. How much soil do you need? You can use the Square Foot Gardening website, has a calculator on it. If you don't want to do the math, you can Google the formula. But basically, you multiply the length by the width by the depth to get the cubic feet. And so a 4 foot by 4 foot by 10 inch square bed will need approximately 13.5 cubic feet of mix to fill it. And the mix will settle over time, but you do want to fill it kind of full to begin with because it will settle. So what do you put in it? That's that's another great topic that there's no really right or wrong answer. It's a personal choice. However, it would not just go to your yard and dig your yard soil and dump it into the bed because it's not the same. It's not going to work the same. You really should have like a 2/3 soil to a third of like compost or organic matter. So if you're going to purchase raised bed mix from like a garden center or a store where it's pre-bagged, like you'll see it in the bags that it's raised bed garden mix, just check the ingredients and make sure maybe some vermiculite or perlite. If you can make your own mix, if you want to do 1 part compost, 1 part coarse drainage material, which would be like your perlite, your vermiculite, or sand, and you would go no finer than builder's grade, and then 2 parts topsoil. If you want to make it easy, you could just do a blend of 70% topsoil, 30% compost. Don't worry about the drainage material. Depending on the quality of the topsoil is what I would question there. Like how loamy is it? Does it have more clay? Should you really add some drainage material? It depends on the quality of your topsoil. If you go to most garden centers or landscape companies, garden soil or like growers mix, this should be their own custom blend of a soil, an organic matter, a drainage material, and it's going to be more expensive. It should be screened, and it's not just regular topsoil, something that they blended. So that would be your best bet. Your best investment would be to get their growers mix, um, or they call it planters mix or garden soil. If not, then you want to get the best grade topsoil, screened topsoil that you can afford from them. And you still want to look at the quality. You want be mindful. You don't want it to be from a non-reputable source where it's filled with construction debris or weed seeds. And you just got to be mindful of where you're buying the topsoil from. If you want to make Mel's square foot garden mix, his is a soilless mix, and you use a third blended compost. He recommends using at least 5 different types of compost. I did not have 5 different types of compost, so I just chose one. A third peat moss or coconut coir. That the coconut coir is the more sustainable choice in this day and age. Peat moss is really not a sustainable choice, but it is readily available. And 1/3 vermiculite, and you want to use the coarse ground vermiculite. Perlite is, I have the definition of perlite. So it's used in peat-based soil potting mixes. It's an expanded volcanic rock, and it's manufactured and heated up to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's like sand. It provides great drainage, and it's lighter in weight. It holds more air. But the disadvantages of perlite is that it tends to float up to the top of the mix. And it doesn't have the ability to hold and retain water. So it's not going to hold any moisture in the soil, but it's going to add drainage to the soil. And you really need to try to have the mix moist. It's really hard to have a totally dry mix and then add the perlite in without it just like floating up to the top. I couldn't find the coarse ground vermiculite when I first built my raised beds, and I did use a lot of perlite because it was easy to get at Country Max, and it does float up. It ends up all at the top of the bed, which is unfortunate. Vermiculite is a clay that belongs to the mica family, and it's naturally found in laminated flakes. So it expands and it holds water, nutrients, air, which perlite does not do. So vermiculite is the better choice, and you want to look for horticultural grades. It's usually called coarse vermiculite. The fine vermiculite is really, really fine, and you got to be careful. You don't want to breathe it in. It's like dust. So you got to get coarse vermiculite. So this would be your soil mix options. Again, it's a personal choice. What can you afford? What are you growing in these raised beds? Do you want to try the soilless mix? It is recommended to top dress the raised beds with 1 inch of compost every year, but you do have to be careful. If you're going to continuously add a lot of amounts of compost that was animal manure, the phosphorus can build up in the soil, and it's not that healthy for the plants. So I would suggest rotating what types of compost you're putting in there every year. Maybe one year it's a manure base, one year it's a mushroom base, another year you're getting leaf mold. They have some sea like lobster compost out there. So I would try to switch it up. And you can pre-moisten the ingredients in stages. Mel talks about putting it in a big tarp and wetting it with the hose, and then putting it gradually build up your raised bed. It was really hard. I put everything in dry, and then you're trying to get it to be wet, and it's like a nightmare because the water just stays like on the top, and getting everything moist in the very bottom is really difficult. They make irrigation systems now for raised beds. Gardener Supply has the sip and drip system. And then there's also raised bed irrigation through dripworks.com. It's not super expensive. I actually did this method for my raised bed garden a couple years ago. The only problem I had was the squirrels got in there and they chewed a bunch of the lines, and so it worked for a while and until it didn't anymore. When you're planting, you want to consider the orientation of the sun. So if you're growing stuff that's going to get really tall, you want to put that in the north. Or if you're going like east to west, you would want to put it in the east. So when the sun is setting, it's not casting a shadow on your smaller crops. And there's different planting methods that you can use. You can use the square foot method. You can do interplanting, succession planting, there's companion planting, polyculture planting. I'll talk about them very briefly, but that's a whole other topic that we could dive into, and we would probably need more time. But I'll cover the square foot one really quickly because that one is the most popular. So you basically grow in blocks instead of rows, and you skip the row spacing. So you work with just the interplant, the spacing within the row. That's what you're working with, and you plant within these blocks. It's also helpful to pick container varieties or patio varieties that don't get as tall as your normal traditional crops. Um, I I tried to grow indeterminate tomatoes and train them to a single stem, and I just cannot figure it out. It does not work for me. It becomes a tomato jungle. So I just give myself more room and I grow my determinate paste tomatoes in my raised bed, but I just grow two, on the back side, or like four per bed because they do take up more space, but I don't want to mess with training a tomato into a single stem. Here's another example of the square foot method. So he's got his different blocks with, some flowers, maybe some herbs, some lettuce, some onions back here. This is another example. If you Google it, you can find lots of different examples online of, the planting ratio. Mel's book also does a really good job of explaining it. Again, if you're going to grow tomatoes, it's hard to grow the bush types really close together. You kind of got to spread them out and give them a little bit more space. So here is an example of a square foot garden, and this one is an example of succession gardening. So they had something here in the early spring that they harvested and they took out. So with succession planting, you're not planting your whole garden all at once. You're delaying the planting and doing it over a period of time. So say you like to grow lettuce, you would sow the lettuce every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, instead of sowing it the whole bed all at once, and you have all this lettuce ready, and how are you going to eat it all? What are you going to do with it all? So it's spreading out the harvest of your crop by planting at multiple times instead of planting all at once. Interplanting is where you would plant, you would utilize the space maybe in between the rows of something, or you would plant something at the same time, but one is fast growing and one is slow growing. So maybe you transplant your tomato and then you plant some quick growing leaf lettuce below it. And by the time the tomato is fully grown and established, you've already harvested and eaten that leaf lettuce and it's, come and gone. So that would be interplanting. Companion planting is the thought of growing plants that benefit each other next to each other. Some of it can be a little bit folklore, and some of it is proven. So do your research on companion planting, what crops benefit each other and grow well next to each other. And polyculture planting is growing more than one crop together. Think of the Three Sisters garden with the corn, the runner beans, and the squash. So they all benefit each other in a little micro environment. So, final tips, start small, take notes, and experiment. If you don't want to build a bed, Batavia has a community garden. You can rent a bed there. Try it out, see if you like it. Then maybe you want to move it home. Start in a 5 gallon bucket or a grow bag. You don't necessarily have to build a 4 foot by 4 foot bed right away. Try to rotate your crops. I know that's hard to do if you only have one raised bed. So in that case, maybe grow your tomatoes in the bed one year, grow them in a bucket or a big container next to the raised bed the next year. Look for disease resistant plant varieties. That also helps if you can't rotate your crops. It will help keep the bed healthy. And clean up in the fall, scout for disease, try a cover crop if you have time. If you don't, try to cover the soil throughout the winter. You can cover it with straw. You could do a thin layer of mulch. You could cover it with compost over the winter. It just helps maintain the soil over the winter months and while it's empty. And if you want to think about season extension, growing under mini hoops with frost cloth, there's a great book called Growing Undercover by Nikki Jabor. She is a Canadian grower and she grows 12 months out of the year in her raised bed garden up in Canada by using her little mini high tunnels. And she's really inspirational and fun to watch. She's on Instagram if you're on Instagram. So most importantly is to have fun. Gardening should be relaxing and fun. It shouldn't be stressful, even though it is, because you're always wondering what's wrong with my plant and what's this bug and where are these weeds coming from? So I just have a couple slides to get you inspired. I love looking at different pictures of people's raised bed gardens. This was one that Jan and I went a few years ago in Rochester. They had a beautiful brick floor all throughout, and then they had the raised beds. And this one you can see here, they did a little leveling. They've got a mix of marigolds and vegetables. They have a trellis here to grow up. They have some tomato cages back here. I know. I know. If you Google it, it's like there's so many. I love the inspiration of raised bed gardening. This one was at the old Youth Bureau garden, and it just shows how much the beds really fill out, the before and after of, you plant it and you think, well, it's kind of puny, but then in a couple months it really does take off and you can yield a lot out of a raised bed. And so my little 3 raised beds are right here. And then I morphed into all kinds of other beds in different sizes and shapes. And this is from a few years ago, so the garden is still even different now. But have fun. And are there any questions?